In 2015, Mad Max Fury Road did something almost nobody expected. A film that had been in troubled development for nearly 2 decades, shot in the Namibian desert with a notoriously difficult production, it opened to $45 million domestically, earned 10 Oscar nominations, won 6 of them, and ended its run at $380 million worldwide. It's widely considered one of the greatest action films ever made. Not one of the greatest of 2015, one of the greatest ever. 9 years later, George Miller returned to the same world with Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, a prequel, bigger cast, bigger scope, bigger budget, and it opened to $26 million domestically, narrowly losing Memorial Day weekend to an animated Garfield movie. Furiosa finished its worldwide run at around $174 million, against a reported production budget of $168 million and significant additional marketing spend. Industry reports estimated Warner Bros. Total loss at around $120 million. This is one of the stranger failure stories of recent years. A genuinely excellent film from a proven director in a franchise the Academy had just celebrated that struggled to find an audience. Let's get into it. Miller and co-writer Nico Lathouris spent over 15 years developing Fury Road, and during that process wrote detailed backstories for every major character, particularly Furiosa. According to Miller, the Furiosa screenplay was essentially complete before Fury Road even filmed. Charlize Theron reportedly used it as a reference for her performance. In 2010, Miller publicly announced plans to shoot Fury Road back-to-back with a live-action Furiosa prequel. That plan fell apart. Only Fury Road went forward. At one point, they even considered an anime adaptation directed by Mahiro Maeda, who had worked on The Animatrix. That version never materialized either. After Fury Road's success, a live-action Furiosa seemed like a natural next step. But Miller noted in interviews that the production navigated roughly 3 or 4 different Warner Bros. Management regimes before the project was finally greenlit, which by most accounts complicated the path considerably. COVID-19 added further delays, with Miller directing 3,000 Years of Longing in the interim. By the time principal photography began in June 2022, the franchise had been dormant for 7 years, and the cultural moment around Fury Road had largely passed. The most discussed creative choice surrounding Furiosa was the decision not to bring back Charlize Theron. Miller's reasoning was straightforward. Since Furiosa takes place roughly 10 to 15 years before Fury Road, the character needed to be younger, and Miller had serious reservations about de-aging technology, pointing to The Irishman and Gemini Man as examples where it still couldn't fully escape the uncanny valley. All you'll be watching is, look how well the technology works, he told Empire. It would not have been persuasive. Theron's public response was notably gracious. A little heartbreaking, for sure, but she praised Taylor-Joy as one of the greatest F-ing actresses working right now. The public record suggests she handled the situation with considerable generosity. Whether the recast hurt the film commercially is genuinely difficult to measure. The 9-year gap was likely the more significant structural variable, but recasting the most beloved element of a beloved film, even for legitimate reasons, introduces audience friction that a straightforward continuation doesn't carry. Furiosa's cost structure is worth acknowledging because it complicates the standard budget conversation. Reported production costs vary by source. Variety cited around $168 million. The New York Times and Deadline reported a figure close to $233 million. The discrepancy likely relates to how Australian government subsidies and production rebates are accounted for, and those contributions were substantial. Various reports estimated total government support in the AU $100 million plus range, though the precise figures were disputed in subsequent reporting. The practical implication is that Warner Bros. Out-of-pocket costs was likely meaningfully lower than the headline number. That said, the studio reportedly carried the bulk of the budget without the co-financing partners like Village Roadshow that had supported Fury Road. Village Roadshow was credited in initial Furiosa marketing material, but omitted from the film's promotion following its Cannes premiere, reportedly connected to an ongoing dispute over Warner Bros. Simultaneous release strategy in 2021. For this video, the production budget appears to have been in the $168 million range before marketing. Total exposure was significantly higher. The estimated $120 million loss figure should be read as an approximation rather than a precise accounting. Furiosa opened Memorial Day 2024 with $26.3 million domestically, below pre-release tracking that had projected $40 to $45 million. It added $33.3 million internationally for a global opening of around $58.9 million, barely edging out the Garfield movie on the same weekend. The comparison to Fury Road is stark. Fury Road opened to $45.4 million domestically and went on to $380 million worldwide. Furiosa ended its theatrical run at around $174 million globally, a significant shortfall against total spend regardless of how the accounting is structured. The National Board of Review named it one of the top 10 films of 2024. It holds around 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. The gap between critical reception and commercial performance is as wide as almost any major release in recent memory. This is the factor most often underweighted in postmortems. Fury Road's $380 million was remarkable for what Mad Max actually is. A niche, R-rated, non-superhero property with a cult following rather than a broad, mainstream base. It overperformed its historical ceiling significantly, driven by word of mouth and a critical consensus that rarely produces those results. Over 5 films, the franchise's box office average sits at around $144 million worldwide. Fury Road was the outlier, not the baseline, betting $168 million plus on a franchise that had previously peaked at $380 million, and assuming a prequel could approach that ceiling may have been optimistic from the outset. Fury Road built its legacy gradually through word of mouth and critical re-evaluation over months and years. By the time Furiosa arrived, that cultural moment had passed. A 9-year wait between entries in a non-franchise property is a long time to expect casual audiences to remain engaged. And unlike Marvel or Star Wars, Mad Max has no ancillary media ecosystem keeping the brand active between films. Furiosa opened the same weekend as the Garfield movie, with each pulling roughly $25 million, contributing to one of the worst Memorial Day weekends in years. The competition argument has limits here. The film wasn't beaten by a dominant rival so much as it underperformed in a generally soft environment. That's arguably a harder problem to diagnose, because there's no single rival to point to. Several analysts noted after opening weekend that the campaign struggled to convey Furiosa's specific appeal to casual audiences. In the trailers, it read as another large-scale action film. The qualities that make it genuinely worth seeing, the operatic chapter structure, the world-building depth, the character work, are harder to sell in 2 minutes than the pure vehicular momentum of Fury Road. Awareness going into opening weekend was lower than projected, and the trailers don't appear to have solved that problem. Honestly, yes. More than the box office suggests. Anya Taylor-Joy is genuinely excellent in a role that demands most of its work be done without dialogue. She carries enormous amounts of the film through physicality and expression alone, and her performance holds up against the considerable expectation of following Charlize Theron. Chris Hemsworth delivers something genuinely unexpected, a villain performance with real depth and unsettling humor that sits well outside his usual register. Is among the more interesting work he's done on screen. Where the film falls most noticeably short of Fury Road is in the visual effects. Certain sequences lean on CG in ways that feel inconsistent with the practical first approach that gave Fury Road its visceral conviction. It's not pervasive, but it registers. And for audiences using Fury Road as their benchmark, it's a visible step down in a specific area that matters to this franchise. The cinema score of B+, suggests audiences who saw it responded warmly if not as enthusiastically as the critical response might have predicted. That's consistent with a film that rewards patience but asks more from its viewers than the marketing prepared them for. Furiosa is one of the clearest recent examples of a film whose commercial result can't be straightforwardly explained by quality. It fell short because of factors that were largely structural rather than creative. A franchise ceiling that Fury Road had temporarily and unusually exceeded. A 9-year gap that eroded casual audience engagement, a prequel structure with its own built-in friction, and a release into a soft market without the specific cultural conditions that had propelled its predecessor. Whether Warner Bros. Attempts another Mad Max entry after a reported $120 million loss remains uncertain. Miller has discussed Mad Max: The Wasteland in various interviews, though nothing has been formally confirmed. What Furiosa arguably needed was the audience Fury Road built over years of word of mouth. What it got was the audience Mad Max historically commands on opening weekend. Those two numbers have never been the same. And that gap is where the film got lost. What do you think? Did you see Furiosa? Did it deserve better? And do you think Warner Bros. Should find a way to finish the story, or has the financial reality made that too difficult? Let me know in the comments.